Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about HTML and CSS. Both of these are languages used for front-end web development. By the end of this lecture, you should understand what HTML is used for and how to create an HTML document. And likewise, you should understand what CSS is used for and how to create a CSS document. All right, let's begin. All right, so many of us might have heard of HTML, but we've got a quick pop quiz for you. Do you actually know what HTML stands for? Does it stand for high-tech monkey language? Does it stand for hypertext markup language? Does it stand for human to machine language? Or does it stand for hidden type mapping language? What do you guys think? All right, pencils down. The correct answer is B, hypertext markup language. All right, so the next question to ask is, what is HTML used for? HTML is used to create web pages. But more specifically, HTML gives a definition to the structure of a web page. So if we want to use an analogy here, if we were building a house, HTML would be the structures and items that are created for that house. HTML is read by web browsers to display content. So when you go to Amazon or Google or Facebook, behind the scenes, HTML is being parsed by your browser to give you a visual presentation of the content. So let's define some terminology that's common to HTML documents. So first, an HTML document consists of HTML elements, and these elements are often nested. Elements consist of a tag, and usually some content. The tag consists of a tag name and may contain certain attributes. An attribute consists of name-value pairs. All right, so that was a lot of definitions. Let's actually see an example. So here I have basic syntax and then an example down below. So a syntax of an HTML element is a tag with a tag name, possibly some attributes, possibly some content, and then a closing tag. All right, so let's look at our example here. So this entire thing is actually an element. All right, so let's actually break this element down into further pieces. So for example, we have an opening tag. So an opening tag is denoted by an opening angle bracket, then the tag name, then maybe some attributes, and then a closing angle bracket. So this entire thing is our opening tag. Then we also have a corresponding closing tag. Closing tag has an opening angle bracket, a closing angle bracket, and then the tag name with a forward slash ahead of it. So that's our closing tag. This is our opening tag. In between, we have our content. So in this case, our content is code Platoon website. So again, together, all three of these items make up an element. Let's further investigate what a tag is composed of. So a tag, as mentioned before, starts with a tag name. So you have your opening angle bracket, then you must have your tag name. Immediately, it should be the first item in your angle bracket group. Then we may have attributes. In this case, we have an attribute highlighted here. This attribute has two components. It has an attribute name. In this case, it's href, and we have an attribute value. In this case, it's the website for Platoon. Together, name-value pair make up the entire attribute. All right, let's proceed. So talking about elements a little further, there are two main varieties of elements. One are block level elements, and the other are inline level elements. So block level elements are elements that take up the entire horizontal space on a page. Some examples of block elements include the paragraph element, or the P element, H1 element, and the div element. Inline elements, or inline level elements, on the other hand, can share same horizontal space as other elements. So some examples of inline elements include the A tag, or sorry, the A element, strong element, and the span element. All right, so we'll see these shortly in play. But just know that there are block level elements, which are the majority of elements, and there are inline elements. Now let's talk about tags. So majority of tags are non-empty tags. These are tags that have content to display. So for example, the P tag, the A tag, or the list tag, list item tag. However, there are also empty tags that can exist, tags that don't have any content in particular, but they still may display stuff on the page. So some examples of those are the image tag, the break line tag, or the horizontal rule tag. All right, one thing to note about empty tags should always be self-closing. So in the example I have it here, I have an image tag, but since the image tag does not have any content that actually goes along with it, it's both an opening and closing tag all in one. So if you notice at the very end, I have my angle bracket, but I have a forward slash right before it, meaning it's closing that tag all at one go. All right, so let's talk about some common required tags for an HTML document. So HTML is your opening tag, and this is defines the start and the end of your HTML document with its closing tag. Within the HTML tag or element, you'll have your head tag. The head tag defines a section of your page's metadata. So this is just this can be data for like search engine optimization, which could be various other values for your page. Most of the elements within your head section will not be displayed to the user. One of these exceptions, though, is the title tag. So the title tag is not required, but highly recommended for a web page. And this simply defines the title of your web page. Finally, we have the body tag. The body tag is all the visual content that's displayed on your web page. So this section is generally required if you want to show something on your page. All right, so again, these are common required tags that you'll almost always have on any web page that you create. Let's talk about some other common tags. So here's just a few of the tags that exist. There's actually hundreds of tags, HTML tags that exist, so we're not going to go through all of them, but these are some common ones that you'll come across. So first, we have header tags. These go from H1, H2, H3, all the way to H6. These are used for section headings. So H1 will be your, largest font, versus H6 will be a smaller font heading. Next, we have text. So text is usually displayed inside a P tag or a paragraph tag. We can also have links. So links are displayed in the A tag or anchor tag. We can also show images. Images can be used with an IMG tag. We can also present data in lists. So we could have an ordered list, which is OL, or an unordered list, which is UL. And within these types of lists, you'll have list items. So the LI tag will specify list items for your given lists. You might also have some tags for spacing. So the BR tag is basically a new line for your web page. And the HR tag, or the horizontal rule tag, adds a horizontal line, which will divide up sections. And finally, we could have content sections. So the two most common ones are div and spam. All right, just to mention, as I said before, there are actually hundreds of tags. So one great website to look up tags is htmlreference.io. This lists pretty much every tag that you might see in an HTML document. Again, as I mentioned, there's a ton of them. This site's really handy. It also specifies things like if the tag is inline or block level, and gives you some other information. So definitely a cool website to check out. That's htmlreference.io. All right, let's get back to our slides. All right, so now that we kind of know the general syntax and some common tags, let's actually build our first web page. All right, I'm going to go to my coding window. Here, I'm going to create a new document. I'm going to name that page.html. So the .html file type will create an HTML document for me that a browser can read. So I'm going to start my HTML document. So the very first thing is the HTML tag. So I'm going to add that, and VS Code will automatically create a closing tag for me. So every tag needs a closing tag. So in this case, I'm going to nest all my other tags within my HTML element. So it's very common that you'll have multiple nested tags within tags. So that's kind of how a document is laid out. So I'm going to tab. So usually when you have a nested element, you want to add white space in the form of tabs, just to make it easier to read the file. Tabs are not required, but highly recommended. So in this case, I'm going to have my head section. Again, closing tag is automatically created for VS Code, but always remember to add that if it's not being automatically added. Within my head tag, I'll add a title. So I'm going to give my title some content, because this tag requires some content for display. So in this case, I'm going to name this, or add my content of my first HTML page. All right, there we go. So that's all I'm going to put in my head section. And now I'm going to define my body. So again, the body is everything that is actually shown on the web page. So in my body, I'm simply going to use a header tag and say hello world. All right, so this is a very bare bones HTML page or document, but I have everything that's required: HTML tag, a head section, and a body section. So let's actually see this web page. I'm going to save my file. Then I'm going to find my file and load it in my browser. All right, there we go. As you can see, I have hello world display. Also, the title of my page is shown in the tab here, my first HTML page. So this is the title tag again, and then this is the H1 element that I created in my web page. And there we go, that's our first HTML page. All right, but let's actually use a few more tags that we went over earlier. So I'm going to go back to my editor, and let's add a few tags. So one we talked about is the P tag, or the paragraph tag. This is usually where you want to put most of your text. Again, you don't have to put in paragraph tags, but that's usually what paragraph tags are for. So I'm going to write something here. I'll say, this is my first web page. Do you like it? And then let's try some other tags. So how about an anchor tag? So again, this is how you create links. So the anchor tag requires an href, and this is the actual link that's been referenced. So in this case, I'm going to do HTTP, and let's link to the Platoon site. I think I have the right address there. So one thing to note, the A tag is an inline element. So this can be combined with another element. So in this case, I'm going to add another paragraph actually, and write some text ahead of it. So in this case, I'm going to write, here's here's a link to, and then my A tag is going to have content of code. And then I also need my closing tag to include that. All right, so here we have a paragraph tag that just has some text. We also have a second paragraph that has a nested A element, and this A element is creating a link to the Platoon website, and that's going to be the Platoon text. That's going to be that link. All right, so let me save this, and let's see this in action. I'm going to refresh my page. All right, so the text that I added, the two paragraphs, are added to my web page. As you notice, Platoon is underlined, and it shows me that it's a hyperlink, which means I can click on it. So let me actually control click and open that in a new tab, and let's see where it takes me. All right, we're on the Platoon homepage. Great website. But all right, so let's go back to my page. Let's add a few more items. So let's add an image to my site, kind of jazz it up. So the image tag is img, and the attribute that's required here is src, and this will specify the image. So let's actually find an image display. So I'm just going to search for something, and let's just find an image that looks tasty. Let's go with this one. So I'm going to actually copy the address, and now that I have the address, I could use that as my source. I'm going to paste this in. All right, kind of a long address, but that should be fine. Usually for images, you want to specify that alt attribute also, and this is just in case the image does not load or does not exist. And in this case, I'll just put a textual description of the image. In this case, I'll say, yummy donut. All right, so this is my opening tag and my closing tag, because the image tag is an empty element. So hopefully this should display an image. So I think the image is going to be kind of large, but let's see what happens. So I'm going to save that. Go back to my web page. Okay, giant donut. That looks tasty. Okay, let's actually try to fit that a little better. So I think we could specify width there. Let's make that 200 pixels. Otherwise, the height can be 200 pixels. I think this should work, but I'm not actually quite sure. So refresh. All right, so smaller donut, still tasty, but again, that's an example of adding attributes. One thing to note is that each of these tags may have unique attributes. I'm not going to go over all of them, but this is where documentation will come into play. So if you're curious about the image tag, just look it up, and they'll tell you what attributes you can add to it. Likewise for the A tag or other tags that you're seeing here, they might have additional attributes that I'm not going to necessarily discuss. But yeah, again, documentation. There's plenty of HTML documentation out there, so you can definitely learn more about these tags if you're curious or going to use them in your web pages. All right, so that's an image tag. Let's see what else we talked about. So we added text, links, image. Let's try a list, and then maybe some spacing, and then we'll finish up with some sections. All right, so let's add some lists. So I'm going to create an order list. So that's UL. Again, my closing UL tag. And within this, I'm going to nest list elements. So in this case, we do little li for list elements. And then I have a closing li tag, and we're going to list some donuts here. So chocolate donuts. Then let me add another list element. Let's say coconut donuts. And let's add a couple more. So just say glazed donuts. And what else can we add? We have pistachio donut. Sure, why not? All right, so this is my unordered list. So I'm going to save that. And then let's actually add some spacing. So we could add breaklines, but let's actually add some breaklines. I'm going to move my image down to the bottom. And then I'm going to add some breaklines. So breaklines, again, are basically new lines. So these are empty elements. So I want to make sure I have my opening and closing markers in my element or my tag. So let's add one more breakline just to see that space. So again, this is going to be vertical space that I'm adding. Maybe one on a horizontal rule. So again, this is just going to be a horizontal line that's going across the page. So make sure I make that a closing one. And let's add one more horizontal line at the bottom, right, before our donut image. All right. So again, just go over this. I have an unordered list, which you're going to have 4 listed items. Also have some spacing that I added. So break lines are vertical space, HRs are horizontal line space. And then I have my image at the very bottom now. All right, let me refresh. All right, as you can see, we added a horizontal line. So that's this line going across the entire page. Have the content from before, and then have a random list order. So maybe we should give it a name. So set up a paragraph and some donut types. All right, there we go. And as you can see, there's some empty white space here. Again, this is the break lines that we added. So that's some spacing we add. Finally, let's talk about div and spam. So div and spam. These are very common HTML tags you'll see. Div is just used to create sections. So they don't really add much visually, but they kind of make it easier to add some effects or some designs. So let's just add some divs to kind of organize our content. So in this case, I just add a div tag in my paragraphs. So put that there. And again, whenever I nest something, it's best practice to tab it out. So I know that my paragraphs are nested within this div. These break lines I'm actually getting rid of. Not really sure for that space. Let's add another div. And I'll put my paragraph and list in there. And yeah, So that's div. We can also talk about spans. So again, spans are inline elements. So if we wanted an example of that, we could try, what would we do? Let's add a span here. Not really do anything, but let's span. All right, again, the span's not going to do anything, but it's just another divider or section within my element. All right, let me save that. Make sure I didn't break anything and refresh this. All right, so we get rid of that white space, but here we still have our image and we have lists. So again, we added a div around these two paragraphs, but notice that we don't actually see anything different. So again, divs are just for, I guess, organization's sake more than anything else. All right. So yeah, again, this is a very basic web page, but hopefully you guys understand how to create an HTML page. Again, you have to start with the HTML tag. And then within your HTML tag, you generally want a head tag and a title within that head. And to display content, you need a body tag. So the body tag will have everything that you actually want to show on your web page. In this case, I have a header, the H1. So again, if I want to show some other header type, we can do H3, which is going to be a little smaller header. I'll say, put my name in there. All right, and then we have a horizontal rule. So this is strictly for dividing up the page visually. The divs are more just for creating sections. Again, we'll see divs more in action later on in this lecture. We have some text and paragraph tags. We have a list and an unordered list. Again, if we wanted an order list, I could create an order list. Let's actually create one. Just see an ordered list. And it's also going to have list items. I'm going to copy this over. And let's actually tabs are off here. All right, so this will be, let's say, my favorite donut shops. So again, this is ordered. So top of the list is of course going to be Do Right Donuts. If you've not had Do Right Donuts in Chicago, highly recommend it. If they're old-fashioned donut, they have a chocolate old-fashioned donut, my favorite donut that I've ever had. So it's a Stamps donut. They have good flavors, not as good as Deloitte's quality, I'd say, but good donuts. And let's add one more. I think Glazed and Infused actually shut down, but let's just add that in memorandum, I guess. All right, so let's see this order list in action. All right, there we go. So it's an order list. We have a numbering 1, 2, and 3. All right. So pretty happy with this website. So let's actually proceed. All right, back to our slides. So again, this is a basic HTML page. Again, we talked about what element is, what tags are, what content is. Let's talk about attributes within tags. Talk about some different common tags that you'll see. So again, header tags, text tags, links, images, lists are pretty common on web pages. So hopefully you understand how to use these tags and what they do for your content. All right, let's move on. So next up, we have CSS. So maybe we've heard of CSS before, but another quick pop quiz for you. What does CSS actually stand for? Does it stand for Common Syntax Systems? Does it stand for Category Selector Services? Does it stand for Crazy Simple Solutions? Or does it stand for Cascading Style Sheets? What do you guys think? All right, pencil sound. Correct answer is D, Cascading Style Sheets. All right, so the next question to answer is, what is CSS used for? CSS is used for designing web pages. More specifically, to define the visual presentation for a web page. So we go back to our building a house analogy. If we define HTML as the structure or the items within your house, CSS would be described as how you decorate your house. So again, when you build your house, you have your floors, ceilings, your different rooms. That'll be all your HTML. But once you actually have the house built, you obviously want to make it personal. You want to make it look nice. So that this is where like painting the walls a certain color would be like a CSS aspect, or designing floor plan, or what type of flooring material you use, or curtains, or just decorations, art on the wall. Again, this would be CSS specific stuff in our house analogy. Whereas HTML would be, I guess, the foundational units, the structure for the house. Cascading CSS or cascading style sheets are also used to create consistent style across multiple web pages. So this is kind of going back to our discussion of the drive principle, don't repeat yourself. Writing a cascading style sheet allows you to have consistent styling and not having to recreate that style for each individual web page you might have on your entire website. So we'll see that in play shortly. But, all right, so now that we know what CSS is used for, let's actually get to know CSS a little better. So what's the anatomy of a CSS document? A CSS document consists of a collection of CSS selectors. A selector consists of a collection of properties. And finally, a property consists of name-value pairs. All right, so let's see an example of this. So here's the basic syntax. You have a selector name, which I have in green, and then you'll have one or more properties within the body of the selector. So the property name is in red, and then the value I have in a shade of blue. So an example, a simple example I have here is the body selector. So this will actually select the body tag, and we'll talk more about that shortly. But this body selector has a couple properties. One is the color. So the color of the body element is going to be this. So this is going to be a shade of red. And we also have a text align property with a value of center. This means the text in my body is going to be all center aligned. All right, so again, this is a CSS selector and properties. All right, let's get into more details about CSS. So let's talk about location types. So you can have CSS styles in several different locations within a page or outside of a HTML page. So the first one is inline styles. So you can have a style that's specific to one element in your HTML document. So an example of this that I have here is a paragraph. And to have a specific inline style, I use the style attribute name, and then I define the style in quotation marks. So in this case, I'm setting this paragraph to have a text color of red. Right? You can also have internal styles. So it's also called embedded styles. And this is specific to an entire page. So this example, for this example, you'd have the style tag. And within that style tag, you define your style. So in this case, I have the paragraph selector and then a color of red. So the same thing, but this will apply to every paragraph in this page where I have this style defined, versus the first example will only be specific to that particular paragraph. All right, so one thing to note for internal styles, you must have them in the head section with the style element nested within your head section. And then finally, we have external styles, and this is the most common use case for CSS documents. The reason being is so you can share the styles across multiple pages, and it kind of separates your content, your structure from your design. So if you do have an external style sheet, you have to link it in each individual page. So in this case, to link it, you use this exact element. You use link element with a rel of style sheet, so it must be style sheet. And the href would actually be the name of your style sheet. So if my style sheet was named mystyles.css, that's the name I would give it. Again, this has to be in relation to your HTML document. So in this case, I'm assuming my style sheet is right next to my HTML document. Likewise, this element for link has to be in the head section as well. All right, so we'll see this in play. Let's actually give this a try. So let's try an inline style, an internal style, and then an external style sheet. And we'll actually talk more about that in a bit. So I'm going to get back to my editor. All right, so I have some content here already. Let's actually add an inline style. So I'm going to go to my second paragraph, actually. And I want to give this a style. So I'm going to use the style attribute. And then in this case, I want to alter the color. In this case, I'll make the color, let's make it a shade of blue, I guess. So we'll go. All right, so there should be some shade of blue. Let's see how blue it is. And then that should do it. Sorry, there should be colon. All right, so I have a shade of blue in there. Let's actually pick a color since VS Code gives me this fancy editor. All right, let's make it a dark blue. All right, so this is an inline style. This is only going to apply to this particular element. All right, well, let's actually add embedded or internal style. So in this case, I'm going to add a style element here. Type that correctly though. And here I'll define another style. So let's keep it with the paragraph. Sorry. And then we'll go color for paragraphs will equal let's pick a different color. Let's go with some shade of green. No. Let's go with a shade of yellow. All right, so we got a nice golden color here. I don't know if that'll be too hard to read, so let's make it a little darker. Let's go with. All right, so be a dark golden color. So again, this is going to apply to every paragraph in my page. But then you're going to have a question of, well, what about this paragraph as an inline style? We'll kind of talk about that shortly. But we'll see what happens, and we'll tail back on it again. So, all right, I've saved this. Again, we have an example of an inline style for this particular paragraph down here that I've highlighted. That's going to apply to this entire paragraph. But also, we have an internal style, which applies to the entire page. And so in this case, every paragraph element that I have will take on this color. All right, so I'm going to save that. Now let's refresh my page. All right, so notice kind of what happened here. I guess this blue is a little hard to see, so let's actually make that a little brighter. Right, save that and refresh. All right, so as you can see, these paragraphs became shade golden shade. That's because that was the internal style for every paragraph on this page. However, my second paragraph remained blue because it was an inline style. We'll talk about why that happens when you have maybe conflicting styles for a page. All right, so there's an example of inline style, and we have internal styles. Let's actually create an external style sheet though, because again, this is the most common case, so I'll definitely want to get familiar with that. So for that, I'm going to create a new document. I'm going to name this, it's called Styles. .css. That's it. All right, so now my CSS document ready to go. In this case, I'm going to add some styles here. So let's add a body, and this will apply to my entire body. We'll talk about selectors shortly, but let's make a color, and let's make this shade of red. All right, that shouldn't be too bad. And then a semicolon at the end. I think I mentioned that earlier, but properties need to be separated by a semicolon. So you have your property name, then a colon, then the value for the property, and finally you need a semicolon at the end of the property group. All right, so I'm going to save that. And now, as I mentioned before, if I want to link a style sheet, I'm going to use this link element. And this will have the relationship of style sheet and href. Again, this is my file name, so my file currently is named styles.css. Right, and then I'll have a closing tag because this is an empty element. Let me save that. And if I link it correctly, all right, notice that all my text became red. However, my paragraphs remained golden, and my special paragraph remained blue. All right, so we have, again, a lot of styles going on here. And again, the question you guys might have is, well, how are these styles actually resolved? And that's a question we will answer, I promise you. So again, that was an example of an external style sheet. Again, this is the most common way. You want to define all your styles in one sheet or multiple sheets, but you usually don't want to have it inside your HTML document. Again, there might be special cases, but for the most part, you want an external style sheet, and then you want to link it via an element like this. The link element, the relationship or REL of style sheet, and then your href would actually point to your CSS document. So in this case, again, my CSS document is styles.css, which is right next to my page.html, so I can just link it like that. All right, let's proceed. So one term that I may have used already and might have confused you is what a selector is. So let's actually talk about selectors. So selectors come in a few varieties. So let me go back to my style sheet and let's actually make that change. So first one I'm going to talk about is the universal selectors. That's this asterisk or star character. This basically means it will apply to every single element in your HTML document. So this will apply to paragraphs, to anchor tags, to lists, to anything that's in your body. Right? So this will make everything red. However, you could also have types. So for example, we added some divs. So you specify the element name. So this is a type selector. So for every div in my document, where a property I set will be set. So let's add a property. Let's say background color. Let's make that. What do you want? So VS Code is kind of nice. It gives me a pre-selected list of some colors. So let me just pick one. Let's pick dark slate gray. All right. So again, just go over the syntax here. You have your property name. You separate with a colon. Again, common mistake to make is to use equal sign. Don't want to use equal sign here. You want to use a colon, and then followed by your property value. In this case, dark slate gray is a property value for a color, and then a semicolon to end my property. All right, so all my divs should have a background color of dark slate gray, so we'll see that shortly. So again, this is a type selector. So I'm actually specifying the type of element I want to target versus the star will find every element and apply this property of color to it. All right, let's actually see this in play. So I'm going to actually save that and go back to my web page and refresh. All right, so kind of hard to read now. So maybe I shouldn't have picked such a dark color. Maybe I should go change that. It's going to bother me. This is actually just an off-white shade. So let's make it. And all right, this should be a light yellow color. Refresh that. All right, so hopefully you guys can see the color here. It's a lighter yellow. But yeah, so again, these are my divs. That's why these portions have a light yellow color, but not my entire page, because I'm only targeting the div elements from my selector here. All right, we can add additional types. So a couple things we haven't talked about are classes and IDs. So let's actually add that to our page that we have here. So for my first div, I'm going to give that a class. So when you give that class attribute, you can give that a name, so type of class. In this case, I can name it whatever I want. So in this case, the class I'll give it will be Gummy. All right, let's give it an ID also. So this one has an ID of, let's just keep it simple, an ID of 1. Again, this would be anything textual, but I'm just going to use the string 1 for its ID. I'm going to go to my second div and give it another class. So in this case, I'll give it a class of, let's say, Tasty. This one will have an ID of 2. So let's actually talk about IDs and classes. But let me add one more div to make this a little clearer. So I'm going to actually add another div here. All right, so I added a third div to separate my list. So I have my ordered list in a div, my unordered list in a div, and my intro paragraphs combined in a div. All right, so let's give this a class, and this class will also be Tasty. So notice it's the same exact name that I gave to my second div. All right, that's totally valid. Again, it kind of ties back to classes from Python. You could have shared properties in this manner, so both these classes will share the Tasty class. Okay. All right, but in this case, I want to give it a different ID. So let's talk about the ID attribute. You don't have to give an ID to every element within your HTML file. It's good practice, kind of, give your larger sections some IDs. IDs, for the most part, should be unique within your entire page. So you should never duplicate an ID. Versus classes can be reused between different elements. Again, I could have this class in, I can use it in my paragraph class. Doesn't have to be the same element to use the same class. However, ID, again, should be unique. So you should never duplicate ID. There might be a few exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, always have unique IDs. Right? So my first div has an ID of 1 and a class of Yummy. My second div has a class of Tasty. And my third div has a class of Tasty and an ID of 3. And I forgot to mention my ID is 2 for my second div. All right, so now that we added a class and IDs, let's actually see how we can use this in our CSS document. So we can save that, go to my style sheet. All right, so the next type of selector that we can have is a class selector. So since we added a class, we can target it with our selector. So to use a class selector, you start with a period and then the class name. So one of my classes was named Yummy. Let me type that. So again, .yummy will be any element that has a Yummy class will get these properties. So let's actually give that another background color. Let's say the Yummy will have, let's make it a light blue. So that would be, all right, so there should be a light blue, and let's do an ID. All right, so do an ID, you do the hash mark and then the ID name. So in this case, we have an ID of 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to target ID 2. It's not liking that, so let me actually change this. So ID 1, 2, 3. I think numbers should work, but I don't think it's right here, so let's say 2. All right, so again, use the hash mark and then the name, the ID name for the element you're trying to target. So in this case, the ID I'm targeting is 2. Let's give that foreground color. And let's make this, I don't know, what should we make it? Let's make it a lighter gray color. So to that, we'll do a, all right, so it's going to be gray. Let me save that. All right, so again, just go over this. We have a universal selector here, the star. We have a type selector here, which is just an element type. We have a class selector here, which is a dot, and then that class name. And then we have an ID selector here, which is the hash mark and hash symbol and our ID name. All right, let me save that, and we'll talk about it. So again, we have a universal selector for foreground color of red. We have a div selector for background color of a light yellow. Our Yummy class should have, anything with the Yummy class should have a light blue background. And finally, anything with an ID of 2 should have a gray foreground color. So hopefully we remember all that. Let's go to our web page and refresh. All right, so let's actually see the changes here. So if you notice, my first div changed, its background color became a light blue. And this was because, again, if you go back to the code, this has a class of Yummy. And I specified that any element with the class of Yummy should have a background color of blue. So again, you might be wondering why not yellow, like we have rules for both, and we'll talk about that. It's coming up shortly, I promise. Our foreground color should have changed to gray here. It seems like that did not happen. And I think I know why. So again, we have an internal style here. I'm actually going to get rid of it. And hopefully you can see changes here. I'll refresh. Right. All right, so something's going on here. 2. Okay, so let me add some text here. Some text. Okay, this is outside of my paragraph, but inside my div. So I think that should go on to. Yep. So as you can notice, hopefully you can see this. It's a light gray because this is in my div that's has an ID of 2. So if I did the same thing for my third div, let's go to my third div again. Notice that they both have the same tasty class, but they have different ID. So here I'll say some text, more text. All right, save that. Go back to my web page. All right, so notice that my some more text is actually red, but my some text is light gray. Again, this is based on the selectors that we have added. Since my third div does not have a specific selector, as in style for its class or ID, it's just going to default to the universal selector. In that case, our universal selector is a color red. But since we specify the ID here, the foreground color for anything in that div is going to be gray in this case. However, the paragraphs within that div are still red because the universal selector is targeting those elements within that div of 2. Right? The last type of selector you can have is an attribute selector. I guess this is one I don't see too often, but if you want to kind of see this in play, let's actually try that. So I'm going to add an attribute here. We'll give it a name. I'm not going to talk too much about name versus ID, but just know that name is an attribute that also can exist on pretty much any element. Let's give this a name of shops. All right. So now this has a name attribute. I can target anything that has a name attribute. And the way to do that would be square brackets. In this case, I'll give the attribute name. That's the attribute name that I'm actually using. So again, name kind of confusing here, but name is the actual attribute in my web page that I have for this paragraph here. So let's give that a style. So in this case, let's try a background color, see what happens. Let's go something light. So we'll make it kind of that orangey color, maybe. All right, so let's make it a little bit orange. Okay, so it should be kind of like a orangey. Yep. So as you can see, this paragraph now has a background color of orange. Now that I've been kind of colorizing this with styles, I want to tail back on the HTML concept that we talked about. If you notice, these are all block level elements. So they take up the entire horizontal space. That's why, when I color this background blue, this entire horizontal area is colored in blue, because that element is taking up that entire space on the web page. All right. Yeah, so I have an orange background for my favorite donut shops, because this has an attribute of name, and I had a name selector target this and make the background orange, or shade of orange. All right, so again, those are your types of selectors. Let me just go back to that web page, or to my styles. Sorry, my slides might be a little messed up here. All right, so here's our selector types. We have universal. We have by type, by class, which again, use the dot from the class name. We have by ID, which is the hash mark, and then your element ID name. And then we also have by attribute, which is square brackets attribute name. All right, so let's actually talk a little bit more about these. You also have some other selectors. I'm not going to talk too much in detail about this. It's a little more advanced, and again, this is an introduction to CSS. But you can also have pseudonym selectors and pseudo element name selectors. So in this example, I have div : first child. This will actually target the first child element underneath that div. So in my web page here, if I had a first child selector for this div, for example, this paragraph would be the first child element of it, and it'll be targeted by that first child pseudo class name. All right, likewise, we could have something that's a pseudo element name. So in this case, I have div : and after, and this will target the area after a div. Again, these are a little more complex. I'm not going to talk too much in detail about them, so kind of just know that they exist, and they'll probably be covered in a future lecture. All right, let's proceed. So selectors can actually be grouped. So I have a few examples here. This is only a few examples, but there's, I guess, technically infinite examples of grouping selectors. But in one case, if you want multiple elements, for example, if you want to target all paragraphs, all header 1s and header 2s, you could just separate them with a comma and then apply properties to all of them. All right, you can also combine different selector types. So for example, we could do it by tag and by class. So in this case, I have p.someClass. And what this will actually do is find any paragraph that has a class of some class in this case. So let me just kind of show you in my page how that might manifest. So let's say I have this class tasty. Now let's go to class yummy. All right, I'm actually going to give, let's say this paragraph down here, the same class. All right, so these both have a class of yummy. So notice, if you remember what my class is doing, apologies for that. Class yummy should have background blue. However, if I want to make a special case here, I'll add p.yummy. And then let's make that a different background color. So I'm just going to have all these different background colors in my web page. Going to get kind of messy, but I think we'll manage. Green yellow work. Sure, it's going to be kind of ugly. We'll try it. All right, so again, I used p.yummy. So this is actually combining a type selector or a tag selector and a class. So only the yummy class that's tied to a paragraph will have this color background. However, something else that has yummy class that is not a paragraph will have a light blue background. So again, going back to my code, I have a div. My first div has a class of yummy, but also my paragraph in my second div has a class of yummy. But notice, again, this is a paragraph versus this is a div. So looking at my style sheet, the paragraph with yummy should have this background color, which is a greenish yellow. And my div, which is class yummy, should have that light blue. All right, let's see if this actually happens. Save that, refresh. There we go. We get this green paragraph in my second div. All right. Let's go back to our slides. So again, you could group it in many ways, but you could also do tag and attribute. So if I wanted to do a paragraph that had a line attribute specified, I could do it like that way. I could do p and then square brackets line, and then apply properties to that. Again, you can have many possibilities. So one thing I didn't talk about is that you could have multiple classes for the same element. So if I want to do that, I think, let's say I want to make my third, let's make my third div both tasty and yummy. All right, so this is actually two classes. And to add multiple classes, you separate them with a space. So I have tasty and yummy applying to my third div. So if I understand this correctly, since my third div is yummy now, it should have a blue background instead of the yellow that it has right now. Again, it has yellow right now because it's a div. But this class will get priority. And again, we'll talk about that, I think, on the next slide. So bear with me. All right, so if I make this change, again, the change I made was I added a second class. So now this div is both a tasty class and a yummy class. And according to my style rules, it should have a blue background when I refresh. So fingers crossed. All right, got that blue background. Notice that my paragraph here still has that orange background. And that's, again, goes because that has more specific style. All right, so let's get on to the next slide because I've kind of referenced this concept a couple times. But yeah, just to have this slide, you have many possibilities. In this case, multiple classes. So in this case, where I have p some class and other class, this will actually look for a paragraph that has both of these classes specified, some class and other class. So again, an element can have 1, 2, 300 classes if you want. So in this case, yeah, this would target a very specific paragraph that has both of these classes on it. Again, you could have multiple elements chained together. But yeah, there's many possibilities here. I'm not going to go through every iteration because that would take forever. All right, let's get to the next slide. All right, so here's the concept of selector specificity. All right, so this is kind of an important concept with cascading style sheets. So as we talked about, there's different types of selectors. We talked about the type selector, the class selector, ID selector, and we also have an inline style, which we talked about earlier. An inline style is the most specific type of style you can have. ID selector is also pretty specific, class selector is less specific, and the type selector is the least specific in this group that I have here. So I have this, I guess, multiplication weight here, and I'll kind of explain that. So when you're trying to determine which style gets priority, you apply kind of this weighting to it. So anything that's an inline style, you give it a weight of 1,000. So this is an arbitrary number. It's not exact math, but just know that an inline style gets a weight of 1,000. But an ID selector gets an ID or a weight of 100. Class selector, we just give it a 10, and type selector, we give it a 1. Again, these aren't exact numbers; these are just arbitrary and relative. So don't take it to mean that 10 type selectors equals 1 class selector. That's not what we're talking about here. These weights just kind of give you a rough idea of how you determine which selector combination gets priority. So, for example, if you have an ID selector and a class selector, that would be kind of added together, but that would still be less specific than an inline style. The inline style will get priority over a class selector with an ID selector. So I actually have an example here. All right, so let's say we had three styles specified in our style sheet. We had something that targeted a class, in this case, some class, and properties for that. In this case, this would have a rough value of 10. Again, that's just going back to our formula from here, 10. So since this is one class, it gets a value of 10. If we have div.SomeClass, the div contributes a weight of 1, and the some class contributes 10 because it's a class. So that total weight is 11. So with these two, if we had something that had a div, that was a div that had a class value, and then something else that had a class value, this style will be used for the div because this is more specific. It would override, or yes, it'll take priority over just some class, the properties of some class. Because div.SomeClass is more specific. It's specific to divs that have a class rather than just anything that has the same class. All right, and then down below, we have a more specific selector. In this case, we have a divs type selector with an ID selector combined. So this is basically saying a div that specifically has an ID of some element ID in this case. So if we applied our weighting, the type selector would give a value of 1, and then the element selector would give a value of 100. So this specificity would have a relative value of 101, which means in this case, something with a div that might have a class of some class, but also have an element ID of some element ID, they'll use this style over this style, over this style. All right, because this is the most specific of these three. All right, so I guess I didn't have another example here, but for example, if I had div.SomeClass.OtherClass, meaning I specified two classes, that would have a weight of 21 because there's two classes specified, not just one. So that would actually get priority. For example, if we had a div that had two separate classes, like in our code that we had, this div has tasty and yummy. So this would have a value, these classes would have a value of 20 in our weighting versus a single class is a weighting of 10. So we had, again, a style that was p yummy, p tasty. And then we had a weight of, we had a style of p tasty. Let's add a background color. Let me get rid of this background color. There, we have a lot of styles here. All right, so notice that we have a style that's targeting any paragraph that has a class of tasty. Then we also have a more specific style of a paragraph that has a class of both yummy and tasty. So let's go back to our page, HTML, and kind of see what's going on here. So notice we have one div that just has a class of tasty, but our third div has both tasty and yummy. So it's going to choose this style over this style, even though that tasty class applies to the third paragraph or third div. We focus on the more specific one here. So if I say this, the first paragraph should be light blue background, second one should be a light yellow, and the third one should have a greenish yellow. Let me refresh this. All right, so actually I lost the coloring for my second div, and that's because I did not use div here. All right, so I changed this to div, so we go back, and there we go. All right, so I changed a few things here, but my div with the two classes specified, that takes priority over my div that has one class specified for my styles. Right? Hopefully this concept makes sense. Again, this is more specific. It's specifying two classes versus one class. Therefore, this div takes on a background color of greenish yellow versus this div takes on a background color of light yellow. That's being targeted by that. All right, so selector specificity, again, maybe not the most obvious concept, but just kind of understand there is a precedence, there's a priority. So it's not randomly picking a style. It's going to take the most specific style that it finds and apply that to your given element. All right, let's move on. All right, so yeah, so that's the most specific. I forgot to show that, but I think we understand, hopefully. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about selector combinators. So again, this can get a little more advanced, but we could actually combine different, I guess, selectors and have different relationships with them. So in this case, if you have space, so basically I have a div space p, this will actually pick all descendants of my div. So any div in my page will get, we'll look for all descendants that are a paragraph. So all descendants means any level. You might have a paragraph nested within another div. Every paragraph, no matter how deep it's underneath my parent div, will get that property. So we'll see this in action shortly, but hopefully that's not too confusing. Likewise, if we do div and then angle bracket p, this will be all immediate children. So this is direct children, not grandchildren or grand-grandchildren, all children, direct children. So just the first level down from the div will get whatever properties you're trying to set. For every paragraph, that's the first child. Sorry, not first child, immediate child. All right, then we could do div tilde, or I call it squiggly p. This will be all next siblings. So siblings are on the same level as that div. So if I have a div and a paragraph on the same level, the next paragraph, all next paragraphs will have that set of flag. Okay. Similarly, you could do div plus and then p. This will mean the next adjacent sibling, but only the next one, as opposed to the squiggly means all next siblings. The plus p means only the next sibling that is a paragraph will get a style based on the properties for that style. Also, you can do something like not, parentheses, and elements. In this case, div not p will mean all elements that are not a paragraph element underneath that div. Okay, so again, that's similar to the first case where we have a space p. In that case, that's all descendants that are a paragraph, but div not p will be all descendants that are not a paragraph element. All right, so maybe it would be better to see some examples because I'm sure that's not quite clear based on all that wording. All right, so I'm gonna go back to my HTML page. Let's actually try to create more nestings. So I'm gonna add another paragraph here. And we'll just say this is another paragraph. But one thing I'm going to do with this paragraph is actually nest it within a div. So this is a div within a div, and then add that paragraph there. So what's going on here is I have my div ID1 has a couple of paragraphs as direct children, or immediate children. But then I have another div, and then a nested paragraph. So in this case, this paragraph here, sorry, I should get rid of duplicate. Wait, this here. So again, this paragraph also is an immediate child because it's directly underneath my parent div. However, this another paragraph, let me name that better. Say this is your grandchild here. The reason I say that is because it's nested within another level. So this is not an immediate child. It's further down. Might be grandchild, but stay nested. Okay. So again, immediate child, immediate child, immediate child. However, this is not an immediate child. So let's actually apply some styles here and see what happens. So I'm going to clean up my style sheet a bit. So let's get rid of my universal selector. Get rid of my divs here. Let's figure out this. So I'm just going to keep my yummy class selector. So again, that's background blue. And then let's actually add another style. So I'm going to add yummy. Now I want to target some immediate children. Immediate children are the children that are directly underneath my parent element. So this can be yummy. And then we'll do paragraph. Now let's make color, make this a red. Okay, so again, this means immediate child. All right, and we'll see the difference shortly. It's actually, let me back up a sec. So I'm going to do all, I'm going to do space p. This is going to be all descendants that are a paragraph. So let me save that. Go here. So, all right. So as you notice, I have red, red, red. Notice the key paragraph here, nested paragraph, is also red. All right. One thing to point out here Notice that my second paragraph is still blue. Question, why is that blue? If you remember, we gave that an inline style. Inline styles have a weights for a specificity of 1,000. So that's going to override any other style, basically, that's being applied for the color. Okay, but like if I had a background color, this would still adopt it. Color, though, is specified inline, so color specifically will get precedence over any other color that's tried to be applied to this paragraph. That's why this paragraph is still blue. But my nested paragraph here is red. All right, so that's what I want to focus on right now. So I have that nested paragraph, but let's actually change a rule. So again, I have yummy space p. This means all descendants that are paragraph from a yummy class object or class element. All right, what if I add the angle bracket here? So again, this angle bracket, if you go back to our slides, means all immediate children, but not grandchildren. So nothing lower than the first level of children. So now that I add this, I would expect, sorry about that, I'd expect that the nested paragraph should no longer be red. It should default to whatever the page is. And in this case, it's just a text color of black. Let me save that. Let me refresh. And voila, our nested paragraph is now black, which is the default color for this page. The reason that happened, again, is because we did an immediate child selector instead of all descendants. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to go over all of the combinators, but feel free to mess around with it on your own. Just know there's various types. Right? You do immediate children, next siblings, next adjacent. Just not, again, you can kind of combine these. So you do like all next siblings that are not P. Kind of do whatever, mix and match, whatever makes your page style the way you want it to. All right, so that's a discussion on combinators. Again, a little more advanced, but you might find use cases for it. All right, finally, let's talk about the box model. So here's a very simple image that kind of highlights what all elements on a web page kind of contain. So all elements initially will have a border, may have some padding, may have some content, and may have a margin. All right, so these are properties you can set via CSS. And let's actually see this at play. So we can kind of talk about what these specific attributes of an element, not attributes, but portions of an element actually do. All right? And we'll kind of manipulate that with CSS. So let me just use my yummy class since that's what I have. Get rid of this selector. All right, let's actually mess around with some of this stuff. So two things we could mess with or three things we mess with are margin, border, and padding. So if you want a margin, let's add a margin. And you can specify top, left, right, or just top and right. So let's just do it one by one. In this case, I have a margin of 10. So margin of, let's make it sizable, 50 pixels, and then 10 again, and 50 pixels. All right, so if I remember this correctly, I believe this is, let's see, top. We'll find out. I actually forget the ordering of it. Let me refresh. All right, so notice that my paragraph, my divs kind of shifted. So it seems like it's top, right, bottom, and left. I believe it's ordering there. Or maybe, sorry, top, left, bottom, right. All right, so the 50 pixels got applied, and that's what this white area is here. So if I actually made that, let's say 200, let's see what happens. Okay, so it's actually my right. I have all these backwards, so I'm going to make that 50. This, which is left, 200. May refresh. All right, notice that we got all this white space here. So if you actually measure this should be 200 pixels. And then notice on our right side, we have maybe 50 pixels here, because that's what we specified for the margin. Let's add some padding. Let's talk about padding. So same ordering, we'll do 10 pixels, let's do 50 pixels, 10 pixels, and 200. Same as the margin. And let's add a border. And divide up our margin and padding. border. Let's give it 4 pixels. And thickness. I think that should work. And color maybe. Let's pick a more visible color, orange. All right, so now we have a border set, some padding, and some margins. Let's actually see this and talk about it. Refresh. And all right, so we can get a border. We can border thickness, border width. Make that 4 pixels. Syntax here, but I know you can do it in one go. You can border width. Refresh. Look it up. So we have border CSS property. Okay, documentation, always good to read. All right, so we do border. Okay, so I need solid. All right, let's copy that. Paste that there. And then I'll do my orange color, so we'll do F9. All right, so it's going to be a 5 pixel, we're going to get a 4 pixel border. It's going to be solid, and then it's going to be orange. So let's refresh. Get rid of this. My page. All right, notice that we do here. Okay, page is kind of getting ugly here, but I just want to kind of highlight what's going on here. So we have our border that we set. That's the orange lines that you see here. This is applying to all of our divs. Reason being why it's on all of our divs. Let's check our style sheet. This is for any thing that's yummy. I'm actually surprised that it's for all these divs. I'm curious. Oh, I see. Paragraph here. All right, so I have 3 divs here. That was my first and third div have this orange border because both of those are class yummy. My second div in the middle is not a class yummy, so it does not get these properties. But I have an orange border that's 4 pixels thick. That's surrounding my entire element. Notice that there's all this, I guess, blue space here. This is the padding. So we set a padding of 200. So this is 200 pixels, but we also have a margin of 200. So if we want to kind of change these values, can I see them in play? Let's make the padding 10 all around. So as a short form, if you're going to have the same left, right, top, and left padding, you just have one value. In this case, I just put 10 pixels, and it'll apply to every edge of my element. Let's make our margin, we do top right. So in this case, we do, all right. So my margin, the right's going to be 40 now, and the padding inside will be 10. So notice how it's going to change. So this should be around 40, and this padding should be shrunk down to 10. Sorry for the technical glitch there. I'm not sure what happened. All right, so I refreshed. So let's look at this. This should be about 40. The top margin is 10. Inside we have, what's our margin? Inside the padding is 10, 10 all around. So this should be 10 and that should be 10. Yeah, so there's extra space up there. Gotcha. Wait, yeah, so there should be 10 padded here. So it's 10 pixels in here. It's 40 out here. This extra space, I believe, is from the margins of these paragraphs, but let's ignore that for now. But yeah, so this is just going back to the box model. So again, we adjusted the padding. So the padding, to define it a little bit better, is the space in between the actual content and the border. So that's internal space. Versus the margin is outside the border, so it's space between two different elements. So one thing to mention about margin is that you can have margins overlap. So to kind of highlight this, let's make a style for paragraphs. Get rid of some of this. So we don't want background color. We just want margin. All right, so we have margin set. All right, let me save that and see what happens. All right, so this is our web page. We have margins for our paragraphs, but I want you to notice one thing. Let's set the margin to 40 all around. So it's going to be top, left, right, and bottom. 40 all sides. Let's refresh that. So in this case, all these paragraphs have a separation of 40. So the area here on the left, there's 40 pixels of margin. But one thing I want to highlight here, notice that these two paragraphs are separated by exactly 40 pixels. Again, take my word for it. There's 40 pixels there. We kind of see it because it's equal space left to the text versus space here, equivalent. So these margins are actually overlapping. So this paragraph has a margin of 40 below, 40 above, 40 to the right, left, and 40 to the right. However, the paragraph above also has 40 above and below. But these two margins are overlapping, and that's allowed. So basically, it's going to take the least, I guess, the greatest margin between these two. So in this case, it's 40 and 40. So they just share that 40 margin. They're buffered by 40, and that's what they want. All right. If we actually change that a bit, so to kind of see margins at play, let's give this a class of extra margin. All right, so it's my first paragraph, my first div has a class name of extra margin. So I'm going to use a class selector. And let's give that a margin of, let's say 100. All right, so now what's going to happen is the first paragraph wants 100 pixels for separation from top, bottom, left, and right. However, all of the paragraphs want 40. So these are going to overlap, and it's going to sum up to 100 because this is a larger value. It's not going to be 140 because this paragraph only wants max or minimum of 40 separation, 40 pixels versus extra margin class wants a minimum of 100. So to make them both happy, 100 will satisfy both of them. So we don't need to go to 140. We'll refresh this. All right, so and this is 100 pixels, not 140. That's equivalent to its left. So you can see that. Might make more sense if we kind of give them coloring here. So let's color this paragraph, or all paragraphs, I guess. I probably want to give it. All right, so all paragraphs will have this yellowish green, and then extra margin will have, yeah, let's just go with that. That is my background color. So that, refresh. All right, so these paragraphs, the content is what's being colored here. So if we go back to our box model, the content area is what is getting the background color. The padding does not absorb or get that background color. All right, so the content, this is the content box. And then, let's see, then we have our div. So let's give our div a background color. Let's give that a hot pink. All right, let's refresh. All right, so our div is this area, and then our content for our paragraphs are here. But let's give our paragraphs some padding. So the padding will actually get this background color. That's part of the inside of the element. So let's do padding. Let's do 20 pixels. All right, so again, just go back to our box model for content, and we're adding padding. So this padding will still get the same background color because it's inside our area. So border inward, that's still in our element. Margin is external to our element. So let me save that. So if I apply that padding, the paragraph should get larger, which it did. So 20 padded, bottom, top, left, right, and right. All right, so it's padding at play. And then we have margin. So the margin is this pink area. In this case, it's 100 here because the first paragraph wants 100 margin versus the second, third, and fourth paragraph. All they want is 40 pixels margin, so that's why there's less space between them. Okay, so that's margin. This is padding. The content's inside. And then if we want a border, we can add a border. So let's set a border. Get that box model there. So border, 4 pixels. Let's make it dotted. See how dotted looks. And then this would be a black border. Save that. Refresh. All right, now we have these dotted borders. My first paragraph is, "This is my first web page. Do you like it?" I know the coloring is kind of ugly, but we got nice donut down here, nice bright vivid colors, so hopefully you enjoy it for my first web page. But yeah, again, content here, padding around, we have a border, and then margin is external to your element. And margins can overlap. They don't sum up. They are, I guess, the greatest margin, but yeah, they're not additive necessarily. All right, that's the box model. Get familiar with this because it's an important concept in CSS, especially when you're trying to add padding versus margin, just know the difference. Borders are nice to have sometimes, and understand what your content box is. So you have your content box, which is your actual content. Padding is your separation between your content and your border. And then margin is your separation between your element and other elements. And that's the box model. All right, so we talked about HTML kind of being your structure for your web page. We talked about how to write HTML documents. Again, that we use elements. Elements are composed of tags. Tags have a tag name and attributes, and some of them have content. So get familiar with our common tags. Let me just go backwards. Zoom through our, all right, so we have some common elements. So HTML, you need this for every HTML document, as well as to find the start and end of your HTML document. The head is where you have your metadata. It's usually where you put your title. Maybe your import, when you want to link a style sheet, you put it in your head section also. And then you have your body. Your body contains all the content that's actually going to be shown on your web page. Here's some common tags you'll find. Again, headers are I guess, larger text, bolder text for, you know, as you would guess, for headers on your page. Text is usually put in paragraphs. Elements, links are created via the anchor or the A element. Images can be used with that img element. You can create lists. You could have some spacing, either vertical or horizontal. You also have some sections in there. All right, that's HTML. Then let's wrap up CSS. So again, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. CSS is used to design web pages. So we'll, again, going back to our analogy, HTML is the structure of your house. CSS would be how you design your house. That's the difference between the two. But they're both important for web development. We talked about selectors and properties. So this is a basic syntax for writing CSS selectors and properties. Know the difference between inline styles, internal styles, and external styles. And one thing I forgot to mention, so I should definitely mention it here, these are cascading style sheets, which means the styles will overlap. Inline styles get precedence over internal styles, and then internal styles take precedence over style sheets. So basically the ordering kind of determines which style is applied. So let's say, for example, your internal style sheet had a paragraph style, and your external style sheet had a paragraph style. The ordering will actually determine which style gets applied. So let's actually show that, because that's an important concept. All right, so let me add back an inline style. So in this case, I'll do style. I'll add a paragraph, excuse me. We'll make this color, let's make it blue closely. All right, so I have an inline style up for paragraphs being blue. And then we go to my style sheet and get rid of all this fancy stuff. And we'll just do color. This will be a red. Right? Get rid of this just to avoid confusion. So simply put, we have an external style sheet which specifies that all paragraphs should have a foreground color of red. And then we have an internal or embedded style of paragraphs having blue. So in this case, we have two conflicting styles. Both of these have the same specificity. Again, they're both a type selector and nothing else. So they're equivalent specificity, but then it comes down to ordering. The last order, the last item in your ordering will get precedence. In this case, our paragraphs will be blue. If I save that, refresh, highlight bright colors. All right, notice our paragraphs are blue. However, if you switch the ordering here, let me take this style. Now I'm going to put it after my link. So my style sheet is basically coming in here after my internal style. So in this case, the styles from here will be applied after, therefore will take precedence or kind of override these styles. So if I switch to ordering, save this, now this style will get the priority. And refresh, notice all my paragraphs are red now. So that's kind of the idea of cascading style sheets. They will kind of cascade and kind of combine down into one master style, but the ordering does matter. If you have the same specificity, the last style that you have defined will take precedence. So that's something I forgot to mention, so definitely important to cover there. But yeah, so inline styles, let's continue on. We have different selector types. So universal is a star that applies to every element in your document. By type, this would be every paragraph element, for example, in this case. We specify any other type if you want. We do it by class, so if you give class names to your elements, again, different types of elements, like a paragraph tag and image tag, for example, can have the same class name. They don't have to be the same element. They can share properties. You can also do it by ID. Again, you want to give IDs that are unique to each element. You don't want to have the same ID in the same page. So make sure your element IDs are unique. And you can also do by attribute, which is a little more rare, but still possible. Then we talked about, we talked about specificity. We combined selector types. We talked about specificity, so just understand that concept. Again, inline styles are the most specific. Type selectors are the least specific. You combine these, they have a weighting. We went through an example again. You can combine like a type selector with a class selector, or a type selector with an element selector, and you got to compute the weighting to determine which one has the most specificity, and therefore gets a priority when applying styles. All right. And we talked about combinators, again, a little more advanced, just be familiar that they exist. And then we talked about the box model. So that was CSS introduction and HTML introduction. Hopefully you guys are ready to create your first web page now and apply some styling to it. All right, thanks guys.